Woman serves a free plate to a malnourished beggar in the restaurant and is fired by the boss. But 2 hours later the beggar returns and what he says leaves her speechless. The hustle and bustle of the restaurant Le Petit Gourmet was at its peak. The clinking of cutlery against fine porcelain mixed with the murmur of diners' conversations, creating that unique atmosphere of upscale dining establishments. Amid all that noise, Maria, a 35-year-old waitress, moved gracefully and efficiently between the tables, serving elaborate dishes and kindly smiling at the customers. "Would you like anything else, gentlemen?" Maria asked a couple who had just finished their main course. The man, dressed in an impeccable suit, looked at his companion before responding. "Yes, please. Bring us the dessert menu." "Of course, right away," Maria replied with a professional smile. As she went to get the menus, Maria couldn't help but notice, through the restaurant's large window, a man who powerfully caught her attention. He was standing on the sidewalk, staring intently inside the establishment. His unkempt appearance and extreme thinness contrasted brutally with the luxury surrounding him. Maria paused for a moment, observing him. The man had a vacant look, his sunken eyes in a gaunt face that spoke of sleepless nights and days without eating. His clothes, though clean, were worn and too big for him, as if he had lost weight rapidly. "Maria, what are you doing standing there? Move!" The gruff voice of Javier, the restaurant's manager, snapped her out of her thoughts. "Sorry, Mr. Javier. I'm on it," Maria responded, quickly resuming her work. But as she attended to the customers, her mind kept drifting back to that man. How long had he gone without eating? Did he have a family? How had he ended up in such a situation? Questions with no answers swirled in her head. The shift continued without major incidents. Maria moved from one side of the restaurant to the other, taking orders, delivering dishes, always with a smile on her face despite the fatigue beginning to weigh on her. "Maria, table 7, please," her co-worker Lucia called out. "On my way," Maria responded, heading firmly in that direction. At table 7, a group of executives was celebrating what seemed to be the closing of an important business deal. Expensive wine bottles and half-eaten dishes adorned the table. "Good evening, gentlemen. May I offer you anything else?" Maria asked with her usual friendliness. One of the men, his face flushed from alcohol, looked her up and down before responding. "Yes, darling. Bring us another bottle of Chateau Margaux 2010. Maria nodded, ignoring the man's lecherous gaze. "Right away, sir." As she walked away, she could hear the group's boisterous laughter and inappropriate comments. It wasn't the first time she'd had to deal with such customers, and she'd learned not to pay attention. She had more important things to think about, like her 10-year-old daughter, Laura, who was waiting for her at home under the care of a neighbor. As she passed by the kitchen, the smell of freshly prepared food filled her senses. Chef Carlos was finishing plating an exquisite filet mignon with a red wine reduction. "How's the night going, Maria?" Carlos asked as she passed by. Maria stopped for a moment. "Busy, as always. But I can't complain, the tips are good tonight." Carlos smiled. "Glad to hear it. By the way, how's Laura? Has she recovered from her cold?" The mention of her daughter lit up Maria's face. "Yes, thank you for asking. She's much better now, though I'm still keeping her at rest just to be safe." "I'm glad to hear that. Take good care of her," Carlos said before turning back to his dishes. Maria continued on her way, heading to the wine cellar to fetch the requested bottle. As she selected the bottle, her mind wandered back to that man on the street. Was he still there? Had he found something to eat? With the bottle in hand, Maria returned to the main dining area. As she passed by the window, she couldn't help but glance outside. The man was still there, now sitting on the curb with his head down. Something stirred inside her. She couldn't keep ignoring the situation. She had to do something. After serving the wine to the executives, Maria approached Lucia. "Hey, can you cover for me for a moment? I need to use the restroom." "Sure, no problem," Lucia responded, though she gave Maria a puzzled look. It wasn't common for Maria to take a break in the middle of a shift. Maria quickly headed to the kitchen. Carlos was busy giving instructions to his team, so he didn't notice when she discreetly took a hot bowl of soup and a freshly baked piece of bread. With her heart pounding, Maria approached the service door. She looked both ways to make sure no one was watching and slipped outside. The chill of the night hit her as soon as she stepped onto the street. She cautiously approached the man, who didn't even look up when he heard her approaching. "Excuse me, sir," Maria said softly. "I've brought you something to eat." The man slowly raised his head. His faded blue eyes widened in surprise at the sight of the steaming bowl. I can't pay for this, he muttered in a hoarse voice. Maria smiled warmly. Don't worry, it's a gift. Please, eat before it gets cold. With trembling hands, the man took the bowl. Thank you, he said, and in that simple word, there was a world of gratitude. Maria watched as the man began to eat ravenously, as if he hadn't had a meal in days. Probably, that was the case. She stayed there for a moment, making sure he was okay. What's your name? She asked gently. The man swallowed a bite of bread before answering. Eduardo, he said simply. Maria nodded. Nice to meet you, Eduardo. I'm Maria. I hope the food helps you feel better. Eduardo looked at her, and for a moment, Maria saw a glimmer of something more than hunger and despair in his eyes. You're very kind, Maria. God bless you. With one last smile, Maria was about to return to the restaurant. Take care, Eduardo. And if you need anything else. But her words were cut off by a furious voice coming from the restaurant door. Maria. What the hell do you think you're doing? Maria's heart skipped a beat. There, at the door, stood Javier, the manager, his face red with anger. Mr. Javier, get inside right now. Javier bellowed. Then he turned to Eduardo. And you, get out of here. This isn't a charity soup kitchen. Eduardo, ashamed, quickly stood up, still holding the bowl. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cause trouble. Maria was horrified by the situation. No, Eduardo, it's not your fault. Please, finish your meal. But Javier had already grabbed her by the arm and was dragging her back inside the restaurant. To my office. Now, once inside, Javier slammed the door shut. His face was contorted with fury. What were you thinking, Maria? Stealing food to give to a beggar? Do you have any idea how that looks for our restaurant? Maria tried to explain. Mr. Javier, please understand. That man was starving. I just wanted to help. Javier spat. Your job is to serve paying customers, not to feed the scum off the streets. Do you think the customers want to see that while they're dining? But sir, it was just a bowl of soup. No one would have noticed if you hadn't. Silence. Javier shouted, slamming his fist on the desk. This is unacceptable, Maria. You've violated company policies and put our reputation at risk. I can't tolerate this kind of behavior in my restaurant. Maria's heart sank. She knew what was coming next. You're fired, Maria. Pack your things and go. I don't want to see you here again. The words fell like a hammer on Maria. Please, Mr. Javier, I need this job. I have a daughter to support. But Javier was unyielding. You should have thought of that before making stupid decisions. Now, get out of my sight. With tears in her eyes, Maria left the office. The rest of the staff watched her with a mix of pity and curiosity. Lucia approached her. Maria, what happened? Are you okay? Maria shook her head, unable to speak. She headed to the locker room to collect her things, with Lucia close behind. I've been fired, Maria finally managed to say as she packed her belongings. What? Why? Lucia asked, incredulous. Maria briefly explained what had happened. Lucia listened with growing horror. That's so unfair, Maria. They can't fire you for an act of kindness. Apparently, they can, Maria responded bitterly. What am I going to do now, Lucia? How am I going to support Laura? Lucia hugged her tightly. I'm so sorry, Maria. If you need anything at all, please let me know. Maria nodded, grateful for her friend's support. She quickly changed out of her uniform, packing it away in her bag. Every movement felt as if she were in a nightmare she couldn't wake from. Before leaving, she stopped by the kitchen to say goodbye to Carlos. The chef looked at her with concern. Maria, what's going on? Why are you leaving so early? With a shaky voice, Maria explained the situation. Carlos listened in disbelief, then anger. This is insane. I'll talk to Javier, this can't stand. But Maria shook her head. No, Carlos. I don't want to cause any more problems. Just, take care, okay? And thanks for everything. Carlos hugged her tightly. You take care of yourself, Maria. And remember, you'll always have a friend here. With one last goodbye, Maria walked out through the service door. The night had grown even colder, or maybe it was the chill of despair settling in her chest. She looked around, searching for Eduardo, but the man was gone. The empty bowl sat on the curb, the only witness to what had transpired. Maria picked it up mechanically and left it by the restaurant door. Then, not quite sure what to do, she began walking down the deserted street. The tears she'd been holding back finally began to fall freely down her cheeks. How had this happened? One moment she was doing her job, like any other night, and the next, everything had fallen apart. She thought of Laura, of her smiling face when she left her that afternoon. How was she going to tell her that she no longer had a job? How were they going to pay the rent, buy food, and afford the medicine Laura needed? Maria stopped at a small park and sat on a bench. The park was empty at this hour of the night, lit only by the faint glow of streetlights. She allowed herself to cry openly, letting out all the anguish and fear she felt. After a while, when the tears seemed to have dried up, Maria checked her watch. It was late, she needed to get home. Mrs. Rodriguez, her neighbor, would be waiting for her to take over watching Laura. With a deep sigh, Maria stood up from the bench. She had to be strong, for Laura. Somehow, they would get through this. They always had. As she walked toward her home, Maria couldn't stop thinking about Eduardo. She hoped, at least, that the food had given him some strength and comfort. Despite everything, she didn't regret helping him. If she had to do it again, she would, without hesitation. The streets were almost deserted at this hour. The few passers-by who crossed paths with Maria barely noticed her, each absorbed in their own thoughts and concerns. The sound of her footsteps echoed in the silence of the night, accompanying the tumult of emotions swirling inside her. As she turned the corner of her street, Maria saw the light on in her small third-floor apartment. The sight filled her with a mixture of relief and anxiety. On the one hand, she longed to see Laura, to hug her and feel the comfort that only a child's love can provide. On the other hand, she dreaded the moment when she'd have to explain what had happened. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step heavier than the last. When she reached her door, she took a deep breath before inserting the key into the lock. The soft click of the mechanism sounded like a thunderclap in her ears. Upon entering, Mrs. Rodriguez came to greet her from the small living room. The woman, in her 60s, frowned when she saw Maria's state. "Maria, dear, what happened? You're later than usual, and it looks like you've been crying," Mrs. Rodriguez said in a low voice, so as not to wake Laura. Maria tried to smile, but the gesture didn't reach her eyes. "It's been a tough night, Mrs. Rodriguez. Thank you for staying with Laura." Mrs. Rodriguez looked at her with concern. "You're welcome, you know I adore that girl. But tell me, did something happen at work?" Maria hesitated for a moment before answering. She knew she wouldn't be able to hide the truth for long, and Mrs. Rodriguez had always been a great support for her. I was fired," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. Mrs. Rodriguez gasped in surprise. "Oh my goodness. But why? You're an excellent worker." Maria briefly recounted the events of the night, the words tumbling out as she relived everything that had happened. Mrs. Rodriguez listened with growing indignation. "That's outrageous," she exclaimed when Maria finished her story. "To fire you for an act of kindness. It's inconceivable." "I know," Maria sighed. "But it's done. Now I have to think about how to move forward." Mrs. Rodriguez placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Listen, Maria. Don't worry about paying me tonight. And if you need me to watch Laura while you look for work, just let me know." Maria felt tears welling up again at her neighbor's kindness. "Thank you, Mrs. Rodriguez. I don't know what I'd do without you." "Nonsense," the woman replied with a warm smile. "That's what neighbors are for. Now, get some rest. Tomorrow will be a new day, and things will look different in the sunlight." After Mrs. Rodriguez left, Maria quietly made her way to the small bedroom she shared with Laura. The girl was sleeping peacefully, unaware of the problems threatening her little world. Maria sat on the edge of the bed, watching her daughter. Laura's brown hair was tousled on the pillow, and her long lashes cast shadows on her cheeks. She seemed so fragile and yet so strong. Maria remembered all the times Laura had faced her health issues with a smile, never complaining. "I promise we'll get through this, my love," Maria whispered, gently stroking her daughter's hair. "I don't know how, but we will." That night, Maria barely slept. Her mind kept racing, thinking about how she would pay the bills, how she would buy Laura's medicine, how she would keep a roof over their heads. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Javier's angry face or Eduardo's grateful gaze, and she wondered if she'd made the right decision. When the dawn began to filter its light through the curtains, Maria was already awake. She got up silently, determined not to wake Laura just yet. She needed a few moments to gather herself before facing her daughter. In the small kitchen, Maria made coffee, the familiar aroma providing a small comfort. As she sipped the hot drink, she began to mentally list her options. She had some savings, not much, but enough to keep them afloat for a couple of weeks if she was careful. She would have to start looking for a job right away, maybe at other restaurants, or perhaps she should consider a different line of work. The sound of small footsteps interrupted her thoughts. Laura appeared in the kitchen doorway, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "Good morning, Mommy," the girl said with a sleepy smile. Maria felt her heart tighten and swell at the same time. "Good morning, my love. How are you feeling today?" Laura walked over to give her mother a hug. "Better. My throat doesn't hurt anymore." "I'm glad, honey," Maria replied, hugging her daughter tightly. "Do you want some breakfast?" As she prepared breakfast for Laura, Maria gathered the courage to tell her about their situation. She knew she couldn't hide it from her. Laura was smart and perceptive. "Laura, I need to tell you something," Maria began, sitting across from her daughter at the small kitchen table. Laura looked at her curiously, sensing the seriousness in her mother's tone. "What is it, Mommy?" Maria took a deep breath before continuing. "Last night, I lost my job at the restaurant." Laura's eyes widened in surprise. "Why? Did you do something wrong?" "No, sweetheart," Maria replied, struggling to keep her composure. "Sometimes things just happen. But don't worry, I'll find another job soon." Laura was silent for a moment, processing the information. Then, to Maria's surprise, she got up from her chair and walked around the table to hug her mother. "Don't be sad, Mommy," Laura said with a maturity beyond her years. "You're the best. I'm sure you'll find another job quickly." Maria felt tears well up again, but this time they were tears of love and gratitude for her daughter's strength. "Thank you, my love. You're right, everything will be okay." After breakfast, Maria began her job search. She called all the contacts she had in the restaurant industry, sent resumes online, and even considered jobs she'd never thought of before. Laura, determined to help, offered to do more chores around the house. "That way, you'll have more time to look for work, Mommy," the girl said seriously. By mid-morning, Maria's phone rang. It was Lucia, her co-worker from the restaurant. "Maria, how are you?" Lucia asked with evident concern in her voice. "Surviving," Maria replied with an attempt at humor. "How are things at the restaurant?" Lucia hesitated for a moment before answering. "It's strange without you. Everyone is talking about what happened. Carlos tried to talk to Javier, but you know how he is." Maria felt a pang of nostalgia. Despite everything, she missed the hustle of the kitchen, the jokes with her co-workers, even the stress of the busy hours. "Maria," Lucia continued, "some of us are thinking about doing a collection to help you out while you find another job." Maria was touched by the gesture from her former co-workers, but her pride wouldn't let her accept. "Thank you, Lucia, but I can't accept that. You all have your own families to support." "But Maria." "Really, Lucia. I appreciate the offer, but we'll be fine. Just, keep me in mind if you hear of any job opportunities, okay?" After hanging up, Maria allowed herself a moment of weakness. She sat on the couch and let the tears flow freely. The weight of the situation, the uncertainty of the future, the fear of not being able to take proper care of Laura, all spilled out in a silent torrent. Laura, who had been drawing in her room, came out. When she heard her mother's muffled sobs, without saying a word, she sat next to Maria and hugged her tightly. "Don't cry, Mommy," Laura said softly. "Remember what you always tell me when I'm sick, after the storm, the sun always shines." Maria couldn't help but smile through her tears. How was it possible that her little girl was so wise? "You're right, my love," she said, wiping away the tears. "And you know what, we're going to do something special today. How about we go to the park?" Laura's eyes lit up. Due to her frequent health issues, they didn't go out much. "Really?" "Yes, let's go." As they got ready to leave, Maria promised herself that, no matter what happened, she would keep hope alive. For Laura, for herself, for the future they still had ahead of them. The park was full of life when they arrived. Children playing, couples strolling, elderly people enjoying the sun on the benches. Maria watched as Laura ran towards the swings, her laughter filling the air, and felt a small spark of hope ignite in her heart. As she pushed Laura on the swing, Maria noticed a man sitting on a nearby bench. For a moment, she thought she recognized Eduardo, the man she had helped the night before. But when she looked again, the bench was empty. "Higher, Mommy," Laura asked, laughing with delight. Maria smiled and focused on her daughter, letting Laura's joy dispel the shadows of her worries, at least for a moment. The future was uncertain, but they had the present, and Maria was determined to make every moment count. As the sun began to set on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Maria and Laura made their way back home. Laura, tired but happy, chattered about the new friends she had made at the park. "And then, one lent me his ball, and we played catch, and it was so much fun," Laura recounted excitedly. Maria listened with a smile, grateful for this moment of normalcy amidst the chaos that was her life now. However, as they walked, she couldn't help but think about the reality that awaited them at home. When they arrived at their building, they met Mrs. Rodriguez at the entrance. "Maria, Laura. It's good to see you," the woman greeted them warmly. Then, lowering her voice so Laura wouldn't hear, she added, "Maria, have you had any luck with the job search?" Maria shook her head, feeling the weight of worry settle back on her shoulders. "Not yet, but I'm still looking." Mrs. Rodriguez gave her arm a reassuring squeeze. "Don't get discouraged, dear. Something will come up soon, you'll see." As they climbed the stairs to their apartment, Maria reflected on the events of the past 24 hours. She had lost her job for helping someone in need, and while part of her wondered if it had been worth it, another part, the part that defined her as a person, knew she would do it again if necessary. Once home, Maria prepared a simple dinner for Laura and herself. As they ate, Laura suddenly became serious. "Mommy," she said, stirring her food with her fork, "are we going to be okay?" Maria felt a lump form in her throat. She wanted to tell Laura that yes, everything would be fine, that she had nothing to worry about. But she also knew that her daughter deserved the truth. "We're going to go through a tough time, sweetheart," Maria finally responded. "But we're strong, right? And we have each other. So yes, we're going to be okay." Laura nodded, seeming satisfied with the answer. "And if we need help, we can ask Mrs. Rodriguez, right?" Maria smiled, touched by her daughter's wisdom. "Yes, my love. Sometimes, asking for help is the bravest thing we can do." That night, after putting Laura to bed, Maria sat in the small living room with a cup of tea. The silence of the apartment was oppressive, filled with unanswered questions and unspoken fears. She picked up her phone and began scrolling through job listings once again. Waitress, receptionist, sales clerk, she applied for everything she could find, regardless of her experience. Right now, any job would do. The next morning dawned gray and rainy, as if the weather wanted to reflect Maria's mood. She got up early, determined to start her job search with renewed energy. While preparing breakfast for Laura, the sound of rain tapping against the window created a melancholic rhythm. "Good morning, Mommy," Laura said, walking into the kitchen and rubbing her sleepy eyes. Maria turned to her daughter with a forced smile. "Good morning, sweetheart. Did you sleep well?" Laura nodded, sitting down at the table. "I dreamed we had a puppy," she said with a shy smile. Maria felt a pang in her heart. Laura had always wanted a pet, but with her health issues and their financial situation, it had never been possible. "Maybe someday, my love," Maria replied, placing a plate of toast in front of her daughter. "Now, eat your breakfast. Mrs. Rodriguez will come to take care of you while I go out to look for a job." Laura looked at her mother with concern. "Are you going out in this rain, Mommy?" Maria nodded, trying to sound optimistic. "Of course. A little water won't stop me. Besides, who knows? Maybe the rain will bring me good luck." After making sure Laura was settled with Mrs. Rodriguez, Maria left the apartment, umbrella in hand and a folder of resumes under her arm. The rain fell incessantly, forming puddles on the sidewalks and turning the streets into miniature rivers. Maria traveled across the city, entering every restaurant, cafe, and bar she could find. In some places, she was greeted kindly, in others, she was barely noticed. But the result was always the same: "We'll keep your resume on file and call you if something comes up." By midday, soaked and discouraged, Maria decided to take a break. She entered a small cafe to take shelter from the rain and have something warm to drink. While waiting for her coffee, she couldn't help but overhear the conversation at the next table. "Have you heard about old Eduardo?" a middle-aged man was saying to his companion. "Eduardo? The eccentric millionaire," the other responded. Maria tensed upon hearing the name. Could it be the same Eduardo she had helped? The very same, the first man continued. They say he was seen wandering around the city last night, dressed like a beggar. Apparently, he was doing one of his social experiments. His companion let out a sarcastic laugh. That man has too much time and money on his hands. Doesn't he have anything better to do than pretend to be poor? Maria felt a mix of emotions, surprise, confusion, and even a bit of anger. Had it all been a sham? The man she had helped, the one for whom she had lost her job, was actually a millionaire playing at being poor. She left the cafe with her head spinning. The rain had lessened a bit, turning into a steady drizzle. Maria wandered aimlessly, trying to process what she had just heard. So lost in thought was she that she didn't realize she had arrived at the street where Le Petit Gourmet, the restaurant she had worked at until 2 days ago, was located. She stopped in her tracks, observing the building from across the street. Through the large windows, she could see the inside of the restaurant. Everything seemed normal, as if nothing had changed. She could make out Lucia attending to customers, and Carlos peeking out from the kitchen. For a moment, she felt a wave of nostalgia so strong that it took her breath away. Maria? Is that you? The voice startled her. She turned to find herself face to face with Javier, her former boss. The man looked uncomfortable, avoiding her eyes. Hello, Javier, Maria responded, trying to maintain a neutral tone. There was an awkward silence before Javier spoke again. How are you? Maria had to suppress a bitter laugh. Looking for work, she answered curtly. Javier shifted uncomfortably. Look, Maria, about what happened. But before he could finish, a commotion at the entrance of the restaurant caught their attention. A group of men in elegant suits was leaving the establishment. At the center of the group, Maria recognized the man she had helped 2 nights ago. But this time, instead of worn-out clothes and a disheveled appearance, he was dressed in an impeccable suit, radiating confidence and authority. It's him, Maria murmured, more to herself than to Javier. Who? Javier asked, confused. The man I helped. The one you fired me for. Javier's eyes widened in surprise and something that resembled fear. What? Are you sure? Before Maria could respond, the group of men crossed the street in their direction. The man Maria recognized as Eduardo was speaking animatedly with his companions. And I assure you, gentlemen, this acquisition will be beneficial for all of us, Eduardo said in a firm, confident voice. Suddenly, Eduardo stopped dead in his tracks. His gaze had met Maria's. For a moment, he seemed surprised, but then a warm smile lit up his face. Maria, he exclaimed, walking toward her. What a pleasure to see you again. Maria was speechless, alternating her gaze between Eduardo and Javier, who was growing paler by the second. Maria stammered, not knowing what to say. Eduardo turned to his companions. Gentlemen, if you'll excuse me for a moment. There's a personal matter I need to attend to. The men nodded respectfully and stepped aside, giving them some space. Eduardo approached Maria, his expression now serious and filled with gratitude. Maria, he said quietly, you have no idea how much I've wanted to thank you for your act of kindness the other night. Maria, still confused, managed to find her voice. But, was it all a test? Eduardo nodded, a shadow of sadness crossing his face. A social experiment, yes. I wanted to see how people would react to someone in need. And I must say, your action was the only light in a very dark night. Javier, who had been listening to the conversation with increasing horror, tried to intervene. Sir, I didn't know. If I had known who you were. Eduardo turned to Javier, his expression hardening. And would that have changed anything? Should kindness only be shown to those we deem important? Javier stammered, unable to form a coherent response. Eduardo ignored him and turned his attention back to Maria. I heard you lost your job because of me, he said regretfully. I can't express how sorry I am. But I want to make it right. Maria shook her head. That's not necessary, I insist, Eduardo interrupted her firmly. Then, turning to one of the men in his group, he said, Jorgensen, are the papers ready? The man nodded and handed an envelope to Eduardo, who then gave it to Maria. I just bought this restaurant. And I'd like to offer you the position of general manager. Maria felt the world stop. Had she heard correctly? General manager. She looked at the envelope in her hands, then at Eduardo, then at Javier, who looked like he was about to faint. I don't know what to say, Maria managed to articulate. Eduardo smiled. Say yes. Your compassion and work ethic are exactly what I need to run this place. Maria felt tears welling up in her eyes. She thought of Laura, of all the struggles they had faced, of the fear she had felt these past few days. Yes, she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. Yes, I accept. Eduardo's smile widened. Excellent. You start tomorrow. And don't worry about your daughter, I've been informed about her situation. Your new contract includes full medical insurance for both of you. Maria couldn't hold back her tears any longer. Thank you, she managed to say through sobs. Thank you. Eduardo gave her a firm squeeze on the shoulder. No, Maria. Thank you. For reminding us all that true wealth lies in the kindness of the heart. As Eduardo walked away with his group, Maria stood there in the drizzle, holding the envelope that contained her new future. Javier had disappeared at some point, probably back to the restaurant to process what had just happened. Maria looked at the restaurant, which now appeared different in her eyes. It was no longer the place that had turned its back on her but a new beginning, an opportunity to do things right. With her heart full of hope, Maria began walking back home. She couldn't wait to tell Laura the good news. However, as she walked, a new worry began to form in her mind. Would she be up to the challenge? Could she really manage a restaurant? So absorbed was she in her thoughts that she nearly bumped into someone on the sidewalk. Oh, I'm sorry. Maria exclaimed, looking up. It's all right, dear, Mrs. Rodriguez responded with a smile. You seem distracted. Is everything okay? Maria looked at her neighbor, hesitating for a moment. Then, unable to contain her excitement, she told her everything that had happened. Mrs. Rodriguez listened, her eyes widening with each passing detail. When Maria finished her story, the older woman wrapped her in a tight hug. Oh, Maria. How wonderful. I knew things would get better for you. I'm so proud of you. Maria allowed herself to enjoy the hug for a moment before pulling away. Thank you, Mrs. Rodriguez. But, what if I can't do it? I've never managed a restaurant before. Mrs. Rodriguez looked at her seriously. Maria, that man didn't choose you for your management experience. He chose you for your heart and work ethic. The rest you'll learn. Trust yourself. Her neighbor's words gave Maria the boost of confidence she needed. She nodded, grateful. You're right. I'll do my best. For Laura, for myself, and for everyone who works at the restaurant. That's the spirit, Mrs. Rodriguez smiled. Now go, tell Laura. That girl will be over the moon. Maria said goodbye to her neighbor and ran the rest of the way home, the rain already forgotten. When she entered the apartment, she found Laura drawing at the kitchen table. Mommy, the girl exclaimed, running to hug her. How did it go? Did you find a job? Maria knelt to be at eye level with her daughter, taking her small hands in hers. Laura, sweetheart, sit down. I have something important to tell you. Laura obeyed, her big eyes full of curiosity and a little worry. What's wrong, Mommy? Is it something bad? Maria shook her head, smiling. No, my love. It's something very, very good. Do you remember the restaurant where I used to work? Laura nodded. Yes, the one with the mean man who fired you. Maria had to suppress a laugh at her daughter's description. Well, someone bought the restaurant. And, they offered me the job of general manager. Laura's eyes widened like saucers. Manager? Does that mean you'll be the boss? Maria nodded, laughing. Yes, something like that. I'll have a lot of responsibility, but it also means we'll be able to live more comfortably. And the best part is, we'll have health insurance that will cover all your treatments. Laura jumped off her chair and hugged her mother tightly. That's great, Mommy. I'm so happy for you. Maria hugged her daughter, feeling that finally, after so long, things were starting to get better. Thank you, my love. But you know, this means I'll have to work a lot. I'll need your help. Laura pulled back a little, looking at her mother with determination. I'll do everything I can to help you, Mommy. I promise. I know you will, my love, Maria said, stroking Laura's hair. You're the best daughter a mother could ever wish for. The rest of the day passed in a whirlwind of emotions and preparations. Maria called Mrs. Rodriguez to tell her the good news and thank her for all her support. Then, she began preparing for her first day as a manager. Laura, sweetheart, have you seen my white blouse? Maria asked, rummaging through her closet. Laura appeared in the doorway, holding the garment. Here it is, Mommy. I ironed it for you. Maria looked at her daughter with surprise and gratitude. You ironed it? Oh, Laura, thank you. But be careful with the iron, okay? I don't want you to get burned. Laura nodded solemnly. I know, Mommy. I was very careful. I want to help you as much as I can. Maria hugged her daughter, moved by her maturity and thoughtfulness. You're wonderful, you know that. That night, while Laura slept, Maria stayed up, mentally going over everything she would have to do the next day. The excitement and nervousness swirled in her stomach, keeping her restless. The next morning, Maria woke up before the alarm went off. She dressed carefully, choosing her best clothes. When she left her room, she found Laura in the kitchen, trying to make breakfast. Laura. What are you doing up so early? Maria asked, surprised. Laura looked up from the toaster, where she was struggling to remove a stuck piece of toast. I wanted to make you breakfast for your first day, Mommy. But I don't think it's going very well. Maria smiled, walking over to help her daughter. It's a very sweet gesture, my love. Come on, let's do it together. While they ate breakfast, Laura looked at her mother curiously. Mommy, what's it like to be the boss? Maria thought for a moment before answering. Well, sweetheart, being the boss means having a lot of responsibility. You have to take care of not only yourself but also all the people who work with you. You have to make difficult decisions and make sure everything runs smoothly. Laura nodded, processing the information. That sounds hard. It is, Maria admitted. But it can also be very rewarding. When you do things right, you help a lot of people. After breakfast, Maria got ready to leave. At the door, she knelt to be at Laura's eye level. Behave well with Mrs. Rodriguez, okay? I'll be back as soon as I can. Laura hugged her mother. I will, Mommy. Good luck on your first day. I know you'll be the best boss in the world. With her heart full of love and determination, Maria headed to the restaurant. When she arrived, she paused for a moment in front of the entrance, taking a deep breath before stepping inside. The interior of the restaurant was quiet, very different from the bustle she was used to during service hours. A few members of the cleaning staff were finishing up their morning tasks. Maria, a familiar voice called. Maria turned to see Lucia, her old co-worker and friend, looking at her with a mix of surprise and joy. Lucia! Maria exclaimed, hugging her friend. It's so good to see you. Lucia hugged her back tightly. Is it true? Are you the new manager? Maria nodded, a mix of pride and nervousness in her voice. Yes, it's true. I can hardly believe it myself. Oh, Maria, I'm so happy for you, Lucia said, her eyes shining. If anyone deserves this opportunity, it's you. At that moment, Carlos, the chef, came out of the kitchen. Seeing Maria, he stopped in his tracks. Maria? What are you doing here? He asked, confused. Maria took a deep breath before answering. I'm the new manager, Carlos. Carlos's eyes widened in surprise. You? But, how? It's a long story, Maria said with a smile. I'll tell you everything at the staff meeting. Can you let everyone know we'll meet in half an hour? Lucia and Carlos nodded, still processing the news. As they walked off to inform the rest of the staff, Maria headed to what was now her office. The same office where Javier had fired her just a few days ago. Upon entering, she was surprised to see it had already been redecorated. The dark, heavy furniture Javier had preferred had been replaced with more modern and welcoming pieces. On the desk was a note. Maria, I've taken the liberty of making some changes. I hope you like them. I trust you'll do an excellent job. If you need anything, don't hesitate to contact me. Eduardo Montero. Maria smiled, grateful for the gesture. She sat in the chair behind the desk, allowing herself a moment to take in everything that was happening. Half an hour later, the entire staff was gathered in the dining room of the restaurant. Maria could feel their curious and expectant gazes as she stood in front of them. Good morning, everyone, she began, her voice steadier than she had expected. As some of you already know, I'm Maria, the new manager of Le Petit Gourmet. I know this may be a surprise to many, and I assure you it is to me as well. She paused, looking at the familiar faces of her former co-workers. Some seemed happy, others confused, and a few, like the sous chef Antonio, clearly skeptical. First of all, I want to thank you for all your hard work. I know firsthand how dedicated you all are. My goal is to continue the excellence that Le Petit Gourmet has always offered, but also to make some positive changes. Antonio raised his hand. What kind of changes? Maria looked at him directly. Well, Antonio, for starters, I want to improve working conditions. Properly paid overtime, more flexibility in scheduling for those with families, and a professional development program for all employees. There were murmurs of approval among the staff. Maria continued, I also want to implement a meal program for those in need. Once a week, we will offer free meals to those who can't afford them. This time, the murmurs were of surprise. Carlos spoke up, Maria, are you sure? That could be costly. Maria nodded. I'm sure, Carlos. And I have Mr. Montero's full support on this. I believe we can do well as a business and do good at the same time. Lucia smiled broadly. I think it's a wonderful idea, Maria. Maria returned the smile before continuing. I know some of you may have doubts about my ability to run this restaurant. I assure you I will give my best every day. But I also need your support and your patience. I'm here to learn and to work alongside you, not above you. There was a moment of silence, and then, to Maria's surprise, Antonio spoke up. Well, boss, if anyone can do it, it's you. You can count on me. One by one, the other staff members expressed their support. Maria felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It wasn't going to be easy, but at least she had a team willing to give her a chance. Thank you, everyone, Maria said, her voice full of emotion. Now, we have a restaurant to run. Let's get to work. The staff dispersed, each going to their respective tasks. Maria stayed a moment longer, watching them. Lucia approached her. You'll do great, Maria, she said with an encouraging smile. Maria nodded, grateful. I hope so, Lucia. I hope so. The rest of the day passed in a whirlwind of activity. Maria immersed herself in the work, familiarizing herself with aspects of the business she hadn't known before, inventories, payroll, supplier contracts. It was overwhelming but also exciting. By mid-afternoon, as she was reviewing some documents in her office, someone knocked on the door. Come in, Maria said, looking up from the papers. To her surprise, it was Javier, her former boss. The man looked uncomfortable, almost embarrassed. Maria, he said hesitantly. I wanted to talk to you. Maria looked at him, unsure of what to expect. I'm listening, Javier. Javier shifted uneasily before speaking. I wanted to apologize. For how I treated you, for firing you. It was a mistake. Maria remained silent for a moment, processing Javier's words. Part of her wanted to reject his apology, to remember all the pain and anguish he had caused her. But another part, the part that had led her to help Eduardo in the first place, understood that everyone deserved a second chance. I appreciate your apology, Javier, she finally said. It wasn't easy what I went through, but I understand you were doing what you thought was best for the business. Javier nodded, looking relieved. Thank you, Maria. Well, I suppose I'll be working for you now. Maria smiled slightly. That's right. And I hope we can work well together, Javier. Your experience will be valuable as I adjust to this new role. Javier seemed surprised for a moment, then smiled. Of course, Maria. I'll be happy to help in any way I can. After Javier left, Maria leaned back in her chair, reflecting on what had just happened. So much had changed in such a short time. Suddenly, her phone rang, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Laura. Mommy, her daughter's excited voice exclaimed. How's your first day going? Maria smiled, the sound of Laura's voice dispelling any remaining tension. It's going well, my love. Very busy, but good. How are you? I'm good. Mrs. Rodriguez is teaching me how to make cookies. Can I make some for you when you come home? Of course, sweetheart. I'd love to try your cookies. After hanging up, Maria checked the time. It was late, but there was still much to be done. She stood up, stretching a little, and walked out of the office. In the kitchen, she found Carlos preparing for the dinner service. Carlos, Maria called. Do you have a moment? The chef looked at her, nodding. Of course, Maria. What do you need? I wanted to talk to you about the menu, Maria said. I've been thinking we could include some more affordable dishes, without sacrificing quality. Something that allows more people to enjoy your cooking. Carlos looked at her, surprised. More affordable. But Maria, we're a fine dining restaurant. I know, Carlos. And will continue to be. But I think we can find a balance. Imagine being able to share your talent with a wider audience. Carlos pondered for a moment. Well, I suppose I could create some dishes that are simpler but still delicious. It could be an interesting challenge. Maria smiled. That's all I'm asking, Carlos. That we consider it. Thank you. As she walked away, Maria noticed that Antonio, the sous chef, was looking at her with a newfound expression of respect. The rest of the afternoon flew by. Maria moved from one end of the restaurant to the other, observing, learning, asking questions. When she finally closed the restaurant doors that night, she was exhausted but satisfied. On the way home, Maria reflected on everything that had happened. Just a few days ago, she had been desperate, without a job and with no prospects. Now, she was the manager of one of the best restaurants in the city. Life could change in an instant, and she was determined to make the most of this opportunity. When she arrived at her apartment, the smell of freshly baked cookies greeted her. Laura ran to hug her. Mommy! You did it! You finished your first day as the boss. Maria hugged her daughter tightly. Yes, my love. I did it. And tomorrow will be another day, and another after that. And together, you and I can accomplish anything. As they shared the cookies Laura had made, Maria felt truly happy for the first time in a long while. The future, which just a few days ago had seemed so dark and uncertain, now shone with possibilities. And it had all started because she had chosen kindness, even when it seemed like it would cost her everything. Mommy, Laura suddenly said, her mouth full of cookies, do you think we could get a puppy now? Maria laughed, hugging her daughter. You know what, sweetheart? Maybe. Maybe now we can. And so, amidst laughter and the smell of freshly baked cookies, Maria and Laura ended their day, filled with hope for the future that now lay before them. The next morning, Maria woke up with a new energy. The nervousness of the first day had been replaced by a firm determination. As she got ready to leave, Laura appeared in the doorway of her room, rubbing her sleepy eyes. Good morning, Mommy, the girl said with a yawn. Are you already going to work? Maria walked over to her daughter and kissed her forehead. Yes, sweetheart. Today I have an important meeting with Mr. Montero. Laura nodded seriously. Are you going to take him some of the cookies we made? Bosses like cookies, right? Maria couldn't help but laugh. That's an excellent idea, my love. I'm sure Mr. Montero will love your cookies. After breakfast and making sure Laura was ready for her day with Mrs. Rodriguez, Maria left the house, a small box of cookies in her bag. When she arrived at the restaurant, she was surprised to see that Eduardo Montero was already there, talking animatedly with Carlos in the kitchen. Maria! Eduardo exclaimed when he saw her. Right on time. Carlos was just telling me about some of your ideas for the menu. I must say, I'm impressed. Maria felt a surge of pride. Good morning, Mr. Montero. I'm glad you like the ideas. In fact, I have some more proposals I'd like to discuss with you. Excellent, Eduardo replied enthusiastically. Why don't we go to your office? Once in the office, Maria pulled out a folder with her proposals and the box of cookies. Before we start, she said, offering the box to Eduardo, my daughter Laura baked these cookies last night and thought you might like to try them. Eduardo seemed touched by the gesture. He took a cookie and tasted it. Delicious. Your daughter has talent, Maria. We might have a future chef on our hands. Maria smiled, thinking of how proud Laura would be to hear that. Then, she focused on the task at hand. Mr. Montero, I've been thinking about how we can make Le Petit Gourmet not only an excellent restaurant but also a business with a social conscience. Eduardo looked at her with interest. I'm listening. Maria proceeded to explain her ideas, the meal program for those in need, incorporating more affordable dishes into the menu, a plan to reduce food waste by collaborating with local food banks, and even the possibility of offering free cooking classes to underprivileged youth. As she spoke, Maria could see Eduardo's eyes light up more and more. Maria, he said when she finished her presentation, this is exactly why I chose you for this position. You have vision, compassion, and a true understanding of how a business can be a force for good in the community. Maria felt herself blush at the compliment. Thank you, Mr. Montero. I really believe we can make a difference. I completely agree, Eduardo replied. In fact, I'd like to take these ideas even further. What would you think about turning Le Petit Gourmet into the flagship of a new socially conscious restaurant chain? Maria looked at him, surprised. A chain? Eduardo nodded enthusiastically. Yes. Imagine being able to bring this vision to other cities, even other countries. Restaurants that not only offer exceptional food but also serve as a pillar in their communities. Maria's mind raced with the possibilities. That would be incredible, Mr. Montero. But, do you think I'm qualified to handle something like that? Eduardo looked at her seriously. Maria, in the few days you've been in charge, you've shown more vision and leadership than many executives with years of experience. I believe you are more than capable. Of course, we will provide you with all the training and support you need. Maria felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. It's an incredible opportunity, Mr. Montero. I'm honored that you trust me with this. Excellent, Eduardo smiled. We'll start planning right away. And, Maria, please, call me Eduardo. After Eduardo left, Maria stayed in her office, trying to process everything that had happened. Her mind wandered to Laura, thinking about how this opportunity could change their lives forever. She picked up her phone and dialed home. Hello. Laura's voice answered. Hello, my love, Maria said, feeling tears of happiness well up in her eyes. I have big news. Do you remember we talked about getting a puppy? Yes. Laura exclaimed excitedly. Can we get one? Maria laughed. Well, sweetheart, I think we'll soon be able to get that puppy. And maybe, if you want, we could even move to a house with a big yard for it to play in. Laura's joyful scream was so loud that Maria had to pull the phone away from her ear. Yay! You're the best mommy in the world. And you're the best daughter, my love, Maria replied, her heart overflowing with love and gratitude. Now, I have to get back to work. I'll see you tonight, and I'll tell you all the details, okay? After hanging up, Maria sat for a moment looking out the window of her office. She could see the street where, just a few days ago, she had fed a man she believed was in need. That simple act of kindness had set off a chain of events that had changed her life in ways she could never have imagined. Smiling, Maria returned to her work. She had a restaurant to run, a future to plan, and a difference to make in the world. And it had all started with a bowl of soup and a compassionate heart. As she immersed herself in her tasks, Maria couldn't help but think about all the people who might benefit from the restaurant's new initiatives. Families who could enjoy a quality meal without worrying about the cost, young people who might discover a passion for cooking in the free classes, homeless individuals who could have a hot meal and be treated with dignity. Mrs. Maria, Lucia's voice pulled her from her thoughts. The vegetable supplier is here and wants to talk to you about the new organic produce order. Maria nodded, standing up from her desk. Thank you, Lucia. I'll be right there. As she followed Lucia out of the office, Maria realized this was just the beginning. She had much to learn, many challenges to face, but she was ready. Ready to lead, to inspire, to make the difference she had always dreamed of making. And as she walked through the restaurant, greeting her staff with a warm smile, Maria knew she had found her true calling. She wasn't just a restaurant manager, she was an agent of change, a force for good. The future stretched out before her, bright and full of possibilities, all thanks to a simple act of kindness on a rainy night. Maria was ready to write the next chapter of her story, a story of hope, compassion, and the transformative power of human kindness.